She grabbed his shirt with both hands, bleeding, shaking, eyes wide with something past fear, and whispered the words that stopped Caleb Walker cold. "Please, just kill me fast." He'd survived a war. He buried men he loved. But nothing in 20 years of hard living prepared him for what he found burned into her skin. If this story already has your heart pounding, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel, follow Clara's story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1872 came down on the Rocky Mountains like a punishment. The kind of heat that didn't cool at night. The kind that settled into a man's shoulders and stayed there, heavy and mean, baking the pine sap right out of the trees. Caleb Walker had been awake since before sunrise, same as every morning, because sleep hadn't come easy to him in years. He didn't talk about why. He just rose with the dark, saddled Dusty, and let the trail decide where they went. He wasn't looking for anything that morning. That was the part that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He wasn't looking. Dusty found her first. The roan stopped so hard and sudden that Caleb's hand dropped to the rifle on instinct. Old soldier's reflex, the kind the war had burned into his nervous system. His eyes swept the tree line, the brush, the shadows. Nothing moved. No threat he could name. But Dusty's ears were pinned forward, and the horse was breathing in tight, quick pulls. Caleb followed the animal's gaze downstream. He saw the shape first. Just a shape. A heap of something pale half hidden in the scrub beside the water's edge. He nudged Dusty forward, slow, still watching the trees, and when he got close enough to see what it was, he swung down from the saddle before his brain had finished forming the thought. A woman, young, collapsed face down in the dry earth, one hand trailing into the shallow water like she'd been trying to drink and couldn't manage the last few inches. Her dress was torn so badly it barely held together. Her feet were bare, the soles cut and bleeding. The bruises on her arms were old and new, both. Some faded to yellow-green, some still dark purple and swollen. Caleb knelt down. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice quiet. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Nothing. He put 2 fingers carefully to the side of her neck. Her pulse was there, weak and fast, but there. He shifted his grip to gently turn her over, and the second his hand touched her shoulder, she came alive. Both her fists caught his shirt. Her eyes flew open. Brown eyes, wild and blown wide with something that had gone way past ordinary fear. And she wrenched herself upright with the last strength she had and drove her forehead almost into his chin. "Hey!" Caleb pulled back just enough. "Easy, easy now. I ain't gonna—" "Please." Her voice was so hoarse, it barely qualified as sound. Her knuckles were white where she twisted his shirt. "Please, just kill me fast. Don't make it last. Just do it fast, please. I can't go back. I can't." Caleb went very still. He'd heard men beg during the war. Dying men, wounded men, men caught in situations that broke something fundamental in a person. He knew the sound of a human being who had genuinely run out of options. This was that sound. He let her hold his shirt. He didn't pull away. "I ain't killing you," he said, quiet, flat, like stating a weather fact. Her breath hitched. The wild look in her eyes shifted, not to relief, to something more like confusion, like she'd been prepared for death and didn't know what to do with its refusal. "They'll come back," she rasped. "They always come back. You don't understand what they'll do to you if you—" "Ma'am." He kept his eyes steady on hers. "What's your name?" She blinked. The question seemed to confuse her more than anything else could have. She stopped, her grip on his shirt loosened by one finger. "Clara." "Clara." He said it like it mattered, which it did. "My name's Caleb Walker. I've got a cabin about 2 miles north. It's in the high timber where nobody goes. And I'm going to take you there now." He paused. "But I need to check how bad you're hurt first, all right? I need you to let me do that." Something moved through her face. Not trust, not yet, not even close. But the math of a person who'd been hurt so many times that one more pair of hands couldn't make much difference. She loosened her grip and let herself sink back. Caleb moved carefully. He'd learned field medicine the hard way, at the hands of an army surgeon who believed in speed and practicality over gentleness. He checked her head first. No serious wound, just a gash above her ear that had bled dramatically and stopped. Her ribs were bruised, possibly cracked on the right side. Her left wrist had been bound at some point, the skin raw and rope burned in a ring around it. Her feet needed care, but weren't broken. He reached the hem of her torn skirt and stopped. "Clara," he said slowly, "I need to look at your leg. There's something—" He could see the edge of it, dark and ugly and deliberate. "I need to see how bad it is." She turned her face away. "Look at it," she said, low and flat. "Everybody else does." Caleb folded back the torn fabric with the same hands he'd used to treat 100 soldiers. Professional. Careful. He had already steeled himself. But his stomach dropped anyway. Burned into the skin of her upper thigh, scar tissue raised and permanent, was a single word. Property. He'd seen that mark before. Not the exact word, the exact act. The deliberate, methodical branding of a human being to indicate ownership. He'd seen it in the war, in a place he'd helped liberate in the last months of fighting, where he'd stood in a farmhouse doorway and understood for the first time that there were men in the world whose capacity for evil had no floor. He'd been 23 years old. He was 32 now, and his hands didn't shake. But the thing in his chest, the thing he kept very carefully banked down, turned over once, slow and heavy, like a coal in a dying fire. He lowered the fabric. He stood up, walked to Dusty, and untied his bedroll from the back of the saddle. He came back and wrapped the blanket around Clara's shoulders without a word. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I don't." She was watching him with those blown wide eyes again, waiting for something. For the look, for the question, for some version of the thing men usually did when they'd seen what she'd been made to carry. "You're not going to ask?" "No." "Why not?" "Because it ain't my business unless you decide to make it my business." He crouched down to her level again, so she didn't have to look up at him. "What I know is you're hurt, and you're alone, and I've got a cabin where nobody'll find you. That's enough to act on." Clara stared at him. Something flickered at the edges of her expression. Not hope, not quite, but the ghost of it. The memory of what hope used to feel like. "If you're lying," she started. "Then you'll know soon enough," Caleb said. "And I won't stop you from leaving." He held out his hand. "Come on, let's get you somewhere safe." She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. The cabin sat in a high meadow, ringed on 3 sides by thick ponderosa pine, invisible from the trail below, unless you already knew the cut-back path that led up to it. Caleb had chosen the location for exactly that reason. Not because he was hiding anything, but because he'd come back from the war needing silence more than he needed neighbors. And the mountains had obliged. He got Clara inside and onto the low cot he kept near the wood stove. She didn't speak during the ride up, and he didn't push. He got water boiling, got clean cloth from the chest near the wall, and worked on her feet first because they were the most immediately dangerous. The cuts were deep enough to fester if they weren't properly cleaned. She didn't make a sound when he worked on them. That told him more than words could have. Somebody who went somewhere else in their head when pain came. Somebody who'd learned to do that, had been living with pain long enough that dissociation had become a survival skill. When he was done, he set a cup of water beside the cot and moved back toward the stove. "You can sleep," he said. "I'll be outside." Clara's eyes tracked him to the door. "You're sleeping outside." "I gotta lean-to. I'm fine." A pause. "Why?" Caleb turned. "Because you don't know me, and until you do, you shouldn't have to share a room with a man you don't know." He picked up his hat from the peg by the door. "The latch works from the inside. You can bar it." He watched her process that. The option, the actual physical ability to lock the door against him. "I'll get you more blankets in the morning," he said. "Sleep if you can." He went outside and pulled the door shut behind him. He stood in the dark for a moment, one hand still on the doorframe, and looked up at the mountain sky where the stars had come out hard and brilliant over the tree line. That mark on her leg was not random. He'd seen it before, because he'd been in the war, and the war had taken him through the worst of what men did to other people, when the law looked the other way, or the law was the problem. What had been done to Clara wasn't a singular act of cruelty. It was a system. A deliberate, organized, protected system. Which meant they were men who believed they had a claim on her. And if they'd had her once, they'd come looking. Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose. He went to the lean-to, lay down in his bedroll, and stared at the dark slope of the roof above him. He didn't sleep. The first 3 days, Clara barely moved from the cot. She drank the broth Caleb left at the door. She didn't speak. Whenever he came inside, and he always knocked first, always waited for her to say, "Come in," before he pushed the door open, she watched him from the far side of the room with the careful, measuring eyes of someone cataloging exits and threat levels. He understood that. He'd done the same thing for a year after the war. He didn't take it personally. On the 4th morning, he was at the work table, sorting through the medicinal supplies he kept on hand, when she spoke from the cot. "You were a soldier." It wasn't the question. She'd been watching him move, he figured, and something in the way he positioned himself in a room had given it away. "Union Scout," he said. 4 years. Silence. "You've seen it before," she said. "What they did to me." He set down the cloth he was folding. "Yes." "And you didn't ask questions?" "No." Another silence. Then, "Most men ask questions." "I reckon most men are asking for themselves," Caleb said. "Not for you." He heard her breathe, just once, slowly, like something had shifted an inch inside a locked place. He picked up the cloth and went back to sorting. On the 6th day, she asked for a mirror. Caleb had a small one hanging near the washstand. He unhooked it and carried it to the cot without comment, then stepped back and gave her room. Clara held it in both hands. She looked at herself for a long time. Then she turned the mirror face down on the blanket and pressed both palms flat on top of it. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were dry, which Caleb had already noticed meant more with her than tears would have. "Who did this to you?" she said. Not to him, to the surface of the mirror, or to herself. Then she flipped the mirror face up again. She looked at herself again, longer this time. "I'm still here," she said softly. A statement, not a question, like she was confirming a fact that surprised her. Caleb said nothing, but something in the set of his shoulders relaxed a degree he hadn't noticed was tense. When he rode into Silver Creek on the 8th day, he told himself it would be a quick trip. Supplies, medicine, maybe 20 minutes. He should have known better. The town had a particular quality to its quiet that morning. The quality of people who had recently been talking and stopped when a familiar face appeared. Caleb noticed it the way he noticed weather. Not with alarm, just cataloging. He hitched Dusty outside the general store and went in. Elias Pruitt, who'd been running the store for 15 years and knew everything that passed through Silver Creek, was behind the counter. He gave Caleb a long look before he spoke. "Heard something interesting," Pruitt said, without preamble. "I come for arnica and clean cloth," Caleb said. "A woman passed through the lower trail about a week and a half ago, or was found in the lower trail, more like." Pruitt kept his voice low, but his eyes were working. "You know anything about that?" "I know what I need from your store," Caleb said. "You got arnica or not?" Pruitt studied him, then reached below the counter. "Word's traveled," he said quietly. "Men have been asking." Caleb laid his money down. Men are always asking something. He took his supplies and walked out. Outside, he took the long way back to Dusty. Around the side of the feed store, past the alley between the tannery and the jail, and he saw the rider. Young man, 20 at most. Dusty trail horse, hard-ridden. Talking to a man in a black vest and a lawman star outside the jail door. Talking fast and pointing south, toward the lower trail, toward Silver Creek. The man with the star was listening. Caleb knew him. Sheriff Warren Hale had been the law in Silver Creek for going on 6 years. Big man, still-faced. The kind of quiet that got mistaken for calm. He had the town's full confidence. Caleb had heard nothing against him from anyone who lived here openly, but Caleb had learned a long time ago that there were 2 kinds of quiet men. The kind who were quiet because they were at peace, and the kind who were quiet because they were very, very careful. He watched Hale listen to the young rider. He watched Hale's expression stay exactly, deliberately neutral. And he watched Hale's eyes move, slow and precise, like a man doing arithmetic, to the far end of the street, where Caleb's horse was hitched. Caleb turned away before their eyes could meet. He untied Dusty, mounted up, and rode north without hurrying. But his mind was already working the way it had worked during 4 years of scouting. Fast and cold and forward. Clara wasn't just running. She was running from someone specific, someone organized, someone who had the reach to put riders on her trail across mountain territory. And the man with the badge had just heard her description from a rider who'd come in hard and pointed south. Caleb kept his pace steady until Silver Creek was behind him. Then he put his heels in and ran. He didn't tell her that night. She wasn't ready to hear it, and telling her before she was ready would only trigger the flight instinct. She'd try to run, in the condition she was in, and she'd die in the mountains inside of 2 days. But he began to change small things. He moved his rifle inside and hung it above the door. He started checking the tree line at dusk every evening. He laid a rope across the lower path below the meadow, knee-high, invisible in the grass. Not to stop anyone, just to slow them, to give him a few extra seconds of noise. On the 11th day, Clara walked to the doorway under her own power and stood there in the evening light, looking out at the meadow. "You keep checking the trees," she said. Caleb didn't answer immediately. "You can tell me," she said, without turning to look at him. "I'm not made of glass. Whatever you're afraid to say, I've survived worse than the saying of it." He stood up from where he'd been sitting on the step. "I rode into town," he said. "I saw a rider talking to the sheriff. He was pointing south, toward the trail where I found you." Clara's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Warren Hale," she said, very quiet. Caleb went still. "You know him?" She didn't answer for a moment. The meadow grass moved in the evening wind. A hawk turned lazy circles over the tree line. "He ran it," she said finally. "The place they kept us." Her voice had gone flat and careful, the way a person's voice went when they were pulling words from somewhere very deep and making themselves do it. "He had the badge. He had the protection. Nobody ever questioned where the women came from, because he was the law." She paused. "I wasn't supposed to survive long enough to run." Caleb looked at her profile, the set of her jaw, the way her shoulders had gone back slightly, just a fraction, like she was bracing for something. "Clara," he said. She turned. "You ain't running again," he said. "Not while I'm standing." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, complex and quiet, like weather changing deep inside a mountain range. "You don't know what he is," she said. "I got a fair idea," Caleb said. "And I'm still standing here." The hawk finished its circle and vanished over the ridge. Clara turned back to the meadow. "He'll come with more than one rider," she said. "I know." "He'll come with enough to make it look like he has the right." "I know that too." She was quiet. Then, "Why are you doing this?" Caleb took his hat off, turned it once in his hands. "Because somebody should have done it sooner," he said. "And because you asked me to kill you the first morning, and I said no. And I don't make promises I don't intend to keep." He put his hat back on. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow I need to start thinking hard." Clara stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching the last of the light fade over the mountains. Then she went inside, and for the first time since Caleb Walker had found her in the dirt by the water's edge, she did not bar the door. She didn't bar the door. Caleb noticed it the next morning when he came around from the lean-to at first light and saw the latch hanging loose. He stood there a moment in the early cold, hat in his hand, and didn't say a word about it. Just knocked twice the way he always did, waited for her quiet "come in," and pushed the door open. Clara was already sitting up on the cot. She hadn't slept much, he could tell by the shadows under her eyes, and by the way she was holding herself, both hands flat on her knees, like she'd been sitting upright for hours working something out. "I need to know what you're planning," she said, before he could set the coffee down. "I'm planning breakfast first," Caleb said. "Caleb." He set the pot on the stove and turned around. She was watching him with that direct, stripped-back look she'd been developing over the past 11 days. The one that meant she'd decided to be honest and expected the same back. "I can't run forever," she said. "My feet are healing. Another week, maybe 10 days, I could move. But there's nowhere to go that Hale can't reach. He has contacts across 3 territories. I know because he talked about it. He liked to talk about it." Her jaw tightened. "Men like him always want you to know how trapped you are." "So you're not thinking about running," Caleb said. "No," she said. "I'm thinking about the fact that you moved your rifle inside 3 days ago, and you've been checking the lower path every morning before you think I'm awake." She paused. "I want to know what you're actually preparing for." Caleb pulled the chair from the work table and sat down across from her. "Hale's going to come up here," he said. "Not right away. He's smart enough to do this slow. He'll build a reason first. Say you stole something, or that you're wanted, or that you're a danger to yourself. Give himself legal cover." He folded his hands together. "He'll come with deputies, maybe hired men, and he'll come with papers that say he's got the right." Clara's eyes didn't move from his face. And when he does? I need to make sure the right people know what he is before that happens. He leaned forward. There's a circuit judge who comes through Silver Creek every 3 months. Man named Aldridge. He's honest. I know that because a friend of mine had business with him 2 years ago, and the outcome was fair when fair was the harder call. He paused. Aldridge is due in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Clara repeated. That's a long time, he said. I know. You'd need proof. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm the proof. Caleb looked at her steadily. You'd have to be willing to say it out loud, in front of people. And Hale would be standing right there. Something moved through Clara's face. Not fear, exactly. Fear was what she'd worn the first day. This was different. This was the face of someone calculating a cost they'd already decided to pay, just working out exactly how much it would hurt. All right, she said. You don't have to decide right now. I said, all right. Her voice was quiet, but it had a spine in it. I spent 2 years letting that man believe he'd broken something permanent in me. He's wrong, and I want to be the one who proves it. Caleb held her gaze. Okay, he said. Then we've got 6 weeks, and we've got work to do. He stood up and poured the coffee. For the first time in 11 days, she took the cup from his hand instead of waiting for him to set it down and step back. He didn't comment on that either. The next several days moved with a kind of purpose that Clara hadn't felt since before her life had been taken from her. She started walking the meadow in the mornings, first just to the edge of the cabin clearing, then farther, forcing her healing feet over the uneven ground in the boots Caleb had pulled from a chest and quietly left by the cot without comment. He walked with her, not beside her exactly, but nearby, angled slightly back, the way a man walks when he's keeping watch without making the person he's watching feel watched. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it. On the 3rd morning, she stopped at the edge of the tree line and looked at the mountains. Tell me about the judge, she said. Aldridge. Caleb stopped a few paces back. He's out of Denver. Came up through the war, same as a lot of us. Adjutant officer, handled military tribunals. He's seen everything. Hard to rattle and hard to fool. He paused. He's also the kind of man who keeps records. If you can tell him specifics, names, dates, locations, he'll write it down and it'll stand. Clara kept her eyes on the mountains. How many women were there? I don't know. At least 14 that I knew of, she said. Her voice was even, deliberate. Some had been there for years. Some were brought in after me. She paused. I don't know what happened to most of them. Caleb said nothing for a moment. Their names, he said finally. If you can remember any of their names, that matters. Those are witnesses Aldridge can look for. Clara turned from the tree line. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was something adjacent. Something that had started to believe in the possibility of a different ending. I remember every name, she said. He nodded once. Then we've got something to work with, he said. Come on, I'll make more coffee. They turned back toward the cabin. Neither of them heard the horse in the lower trees. Caleb was splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard Dusty blow a sharp warning. He had the axe in both hands before the sound finished. He went around the corner of the cabin at a walk that looked casual from a distance and was anything but. The horse was at the rail, head up, facing the lower path. A rider had just crested the rise. Not a lawman's horse. No badge, no marked tack. A plain brown gelding, a little underfed. The rider was a woman, maybe 40 years old, with a dark shawl and the kind of face that didn't give much away. She rode alone, which took nerve up in this part of the territory, and she reined in at the edge of the yard and called out before she came any closer. "I'm looking for Caleb Walker." "You found him," Caleb said. He didn't put the axe down. "My name is Ruth Delaney. I run the laundry on Pike Street in Silver Creek." She kept her hands visible on the reins. "I heard something, and I need you to hear it too." "How'd you know where to find me?" "Elias Pruitt told me you lived north in the high timber. I've been on this trail since before sunup." She glanced at the axe. "I'm not carrying anything but a piece of information that's going to get somebody killed if it doesn't reach the right ears." Caleb studied her for 5 seconds. Then he lowered the axe. "Step down," he said. "I'll get water for your horse." He checked the cabin doorway as she dismounted. Clara was standing just inside the shadow, still, watching. He gave her a slight nod. "Stay back." She stayed. Ruth Delaney took the cup of water Caleb offered and drank half of it before she spoke. "Hale's been in town 3 days," she said. "He's been quiet about it. No announcements, no official word. But he's been talking to the men who do work for him. And those men aren't quiet." She set the cup down. "2 nights ago, one of them got liquored up in the saloon and started talking to my husband before he remembered my husband works for me and not for Hale. He said they're moving inside the week. Said Hale's got a writ from a county court down south. Says the woman is a criminal fugitive, stolen property from a legitimate business concern." Caleb's jaw tightened. Stolen property. That's the language they used. Ruth's voice was level, but hard. "My husband came home and told me, and I didn't sleep. Because I know what Hale is. I've known for 2 years. I've watched women come through this town on the way to wherever he takes them, and I've told myself it wasn't my business." She stopped, pressed her lips together briefly. "I'm done telling myself that." "How many men is he bringing?" Caleb asked. 4 that we know of, plus himself." She paused. "One of them is his deputy, Cole, who's worse than he is." Caleb was already turning. He opened the cabin door and looked at Clara. She'd heard everything. She was standing in the middle of the floor, arms crossed over her chest, not in a frightened way, in the way of a person holding themselves together because that was what was required right now. "Less than a week," she said. "Yes." "Then we can't wait for the judge." "No," Caleb said. "We can't." Ruth Delaney appeared behind him in the doorway. Clara looked at her. Ruth looked back. And then something shifted in Ruth's expression. Not pity, something older than pity. The look of a woman who recognized a specific kind of wound. "I can get word to 3 other women in town who'll testify," Ruth said. "Women who've seen things. Not the same as what happened to you, but enough to support a pattern." She was talking to Clara now, not to Caleb. "And I know where Hale keeps his ledgers." Clara's eyes sharpened. His ledgers? He kept records. Names, dates, amounts. Men like him always keep records because they think they're untouchable. Ruth took 1 step into the cabin. "I've known a woman who cleaned his office for 6 years. She told me where he keeps them in case she ever needed to run. She never did." A beat. "But you can." The silence in the cabin was absolute for a moment. Then Clara uncrossed her arms. "Tell me everything," she said. Ruth left an hour later, with Caleb's word that he'd ride down to the back of Hale's office building that night and meet her husband behind the cooperage at midnight. She rode back down the trail the way she came and was gone in the trees. Caleb turned from the rail. Clara was sitting on the step. "You trust her?" she asked. "Enough," he said. "She didn't have any reason to ride 3 hours into the mountains to lie to me." "People do things for complicated reasons." "True." He sat down on the step beside her. First time he'd sat that close, and he noticed her register it. A slight stillness. Not fear anymore, but awareness. What's your read on her? Clara thought about that. She's been carrying guilt, she said. The kind that waits until it can't wait anymore. That's real. She paused. She's not working for Hale. Nobody working for Hale would lead him to his ledgers. My thought too, Caleb said. Clara was quiet for a moment. If you ride into town tonight, she said, and Hale's men are watching, they'll follow you back. I know. So you can't come back here tonight? No, he said. I'll need to stay low until morning. Come back the long way. He looked at her. You'll be alone up here. Clara met his eyes. She thought of the first night, the barred door, the way she'd lain awake, cataloging every sound the cabin made. I'll be fine, she said. I'll leave the rifle. I know how to shoot. She said it like it was an ordinary fact. Maybe it was by now. Go get those ledgers, Caleb. He stood up. He took his hat off, ran a hand through his hair, put it back. I need you to promise me something, he said. She looked up at him. If something goes wrong tonight, if I'm not back by noon tomorrow, don't wait. Take Dusty and ride northeast until you hit the Garrison Road, then follow it to the fort. Ask for Lieutenant Mills. Tell him Caleb Walker sent you. He paused. He'll take care of you. Clara was still for a long moment. Nothing's going to go wrong, she said. Promise me anyway. She looked at him, the full, direct look that she'd been learning to let herself use, the one that saw a person clearly and didn't flinch from what it found. I promise, she said. Caleb nodded. He went to saddle Dusty. He didn't come back by noon. Clara knew by 9 in the morning that something was wrong. Not because of anything she'd seen or heard, but because Caleb Walker was a man who kept his word, and if he'd said he'd be back by morning on the long way around, he'd have found a way. She stood in the cabin doorway with a rifle in her hands and watched the trail. At 10, she made herself eat something, because running on empty was how people made bad decisions. At 11, she went to the lean-to and saddled Dusty, with hands that were steady because she made them be steady. At 11:30, she was about to lead the horse out of the yard when she heard the hoofbeats. Fast, uneven, more than one horse. She pulled Dusty back into the shadow of the lean-to and raised the rifle. A single rider came over the rise. She had her finger inside the trigger guard before she recognized the horse. It was a bay she'd seen hitched outside the cooperage in town once, early in her time with Caleb, when she'd been just well enough to ride down once with him. The rider was young, maybe 19, with a split lip and a hard look of someone who'd been running scared long enough to get past scared and into something colder. He pulled up at the edge of the yard and called out, "Miss Clara?" She didn't move from the shadow. "Who sent you?" she said. "Ruth Delaney," he said. "I'm her nephew, Thomas. Ma'am, you need to come now. Mr. Walker got the ledgers last night, but Hale was waiting. They've got him." He wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand. "They took him into the forest south of town. Him and Cole and 3 others. Ruth says if you don't come, they're going to bury him out there where nobody'll ever find him." Clara's grip on the rifle didn't move. Her mind was working, fast and cold, the way it had learned to work in a place where every decision had a consequence. Hale was using Caleb to draw her out. She knew that. Thomas Delaney's split lip was real. Ruth's fear was real. The ledgers were probably real. And Caleb's body in the forest would be very, very real if she stood here and waited. She stepped out of the shadow. "How far?" she said. "Hour's ride, maybe less if we push." Thomas steadied his horse. "Ruth's already there. She's got 2 other women with her. She said to tell you." This ends today. Clara looked at the mountains. She thought about what Caleb had said. You ain't running again, not while I'm standing. She thought about what she'd said back. I want to be the one who proves it. She swung up into the saddle. Then let's go, she said, and she rode down off the mountain toward the thing she'd been running from for 2 years, with a rifle across her saddle and her chin up, and the only thing in her chest that felt like fear was the fear of arriving too late. The ride down was the longest hour of Clara's life, not because of the distance, because of what was waiting at the end of it, and because her mind kept doing the thing it did under pressure, running every possible version of what she was riding into, sorting them by likelihood, trying to find the one where Caleb was still alive. Thomas Delaney rode hard and didn't talk, which she was grateful for. She didn't need conversation. She needed to think. Hale had been waiting. That meant someone had told him about the midnight meeting at the cooperage, which meant Ruth's plan had a hole in it, or someone in Ruth's circle had a reason to talk. That mattered. It meant Hale might already know exactly how much information had changed hands. He might know about the ledgers, or he might have the ledgers back. The thought hit her like cold water. If he had the ledgers back, the evidence was gone. Ruth's testimony and the testimony of 2 other women in town would be powerful. But a man with a badge and 6 years of goodwill in a territory could outlast testimony. He'd done it before. He'd built his whole operation on the confidence of people who couldn't imagine he was anything other than what he appeared. Clara gripped the reins tighter and kept riding. She wasn't going to think about the ledgers right now. She was going to think about Caleb. Ruth was exactly where Thomas said she'd be, on the north edge of the tree line, above the dry gulch, south of Silver Creek, crouched behind a cluster of boulders, with 2 other women pressed close beside her. One was older, gray-haired, with the hands of someone who'd done hard work for decades. The other was younger than Clara, maybe 20, with frightened eyes that had seen enough to know what frightened looked like on other faces. Clara swung down before the horse fully stopped. "Where is he?" she said. Ruth grabbed her arm and pulled her down into the crouch before she could straighten to her full height. "Keep low. Cole's men are positioned on the south ridge. If they see you before we're ready." "How bad is he hurt?" Ruth's expression answered before her words did. "He's conscious. I saw him 20 minutes ago through Thomas's field glass. He's tied to the big pine at the bottom of the gulch. They worked him over pretty good, but he's upright." She paused. "Hale's with him. He's been talking at him for an hour." "Talking," Clara said, "trying to find out where you are, where the ledgers are." Ruth's jaw was tight. "Caleb hasn't said anything. Cole hit him twice more for it. He still hasn't said anything." Something moved through Clara's chest. Not soft, hard and hot and very, very clear. "The ledgers," she said. "Did you get them out?" Ruth reached inside her coat and pulled out a folded oilskin packet, thick with papers. "Thomas got them to me before Hale's men grabbed Caleb. They don't know we have them." She pressed the packet into Clara's hands. "Names, dates, payments. 22 women, Clara. 22 names." Clara held the packet. 22. She'd thought 14. She hadn't known the full number. She closed her fingers around the oilskin and pushed it inside her own coat. "What's the plan?" she said. Ruth looked at her squarely. "The plan was to wait for you and figure one out." Clara almost laughed. It came out wrong, too dry, too tired around the edges. The young woman beside Ruth flinched slightly at the sound of it. "All right," Clara said. She turned to Thomas, who'd crouched down beside them. "How many men total, and where are they positioned?" Hale and Cole are down in the gulch with Caleb. 2 men on the south ridge. I can see them from here when they move. 1 more on the trail coming in from town, acting like he's just a passing rider, but he's been sitting that same spot for an hour. Thomas wiped the dried blood from his chin. 5 total. 5 armed men, Clara said. Yes, ma'am. Against 4 of us, 1 rifle, and whatever you're carrying. Thomas has a pistol, Ruth said. Margaret, she indicated the older woman, has a shotgun. Addie doesn't have a weapon, but she knows this land better than any of them. She grew up on the other side of this gulch. Clara looked at the young woman, Addie, who was watching her with those frightened eyes. The fear was real, but there was something underneath it, something that had been waiting a long time. You know another way into that gulch, Clara said. Not a question. Addie swallowed. Yes, ma'am. There's a cut that comes in from the east side. Narrows down to almost nothing, but a person can get through on foot. She paused. I used to play in it as a girl. Hale's men wouldn't know it's there. Could you get a person through it quietly? 1 person with a rifle? Addie looked at the gulch below, then back at Clara. Yes, she said. Clara thought for exactly 4 seconds. She was counting because 4 seconds was long enough to think and short enough to not lose nerve. Here's what we're doing, she said. The plan had 3 parts and depended entirely on timing, which was the worst kind of plan, but it was the only one they had. Addie would take Clara through the east cut and get her to the bottom of the gulch within shooting distance of the pine tree. Ruth would wait 15 minutes and then walk openly down the main trail into the gulch, no weapon showing, both hands visible. Because Ruth Delaney was a known figure in Silver Creek, and Hale wouldn't shoot her in front of witnesses without cause. Her job was to create a distraction, to make Hale look at her instead of the tree line. Thomas and Margaret would take up positions on the near ridge, covering the 2 men on the south ridge, not to shoot unless shooting started, just to make sure nobody could flank them when things went loud. And things were going to go loud. What are you going to do when you get down there? Ruth asked. Clara checked the rifle. Full load. She'd reloaded it back at the cabin 3 days ago, and Caleb had checked it after her, his eyes approving, without comment. Get Caleb free, she said. And Hale? Clara looked up. Hale's going to answer for what he did, she said, one way or another. Ruth held her gaze, then nodded once, slow and deliberate, like a woman sealing a deal she'd been postponing for 2 years. Clara turned to Addie. Let's go. The east cut was exactly as narrow as Addie had described. Clara moved through it with the rifle held sideways against her body, her breath controlled, her feet placed carefully on each step. Addie moved ahead of her like she'd been doing it her whole life. Because she had, and Clara kept her eyes on the girl's back and matched her pace exactly. The voices reached her before the clearing did. Hale's voice, low and deliberate, the kind of voice that was used to not needing to raise itself. I'm going to ask you one more time, Walker. Where is she? And then Caleb's voice, rougher than usual, with the wet quality of a man breathing through pain, but steady. Reckon you'll be asking all afternoon. Cole! The sound that followed made Clara's teeth clench. She kept moving. She came out of the cut at the base of the east wall of the gulch, behind a flat boulder that gave her partial cover. She pressed against it and looked. Caleb was tied to the pine 20 feet ahead of her. His hat was gone, his shirt was torn at the shoulder, and there was blood on the side of his face. His hands were bound behind the trunk, and he was standing because sitting wasn't an option with the rope positioned the way it was. Cole, a wide man, flat-faced and deliberate in his cruelty in the way of someone who enjoyed the work, was standing 3 feet away. And Hale. Clara had not seen Warren Hale in 2 years. He was exactly as she remembered him, which was the worst part. He looked like a sheriff. He looked like every reassuring, solid, trustworthy embodiment of law and order that the territory had been built to produce. Silver at his temples, a straight back, clean boots, the badge catching the afternoon light in a way that would have looked righteous in a painting. She watched him and felt 2 years of nightmares take shape in the sunlight, and she breathed through it. In, out, slow, because she could not afford to stop moving. She brought the rifle up, and then she heard Ruth's voice from the trail above. "Warren Hale!" Hale turned. Cole turned. Clara moved. She came around the boulder fast and crossed the 10 feet to the pine before anyone had finished processing the sound of Ruth's voice. And she put herself between Caleb and Cole with the rifle leveled and said, loud and flat and without a shake in it, "Don't." Cole froze. Hale turned back from the trail entrance. He saw her. The expression that moved through his face was not surprise. That was the thing she would remember later. It was not surprise. It was the expression of a man whose calculation had been confirmed. He'd known she would come. He'd counted on it. This had always been the plan. "Clara," he said, like she was a returning piece of furniture. "Get away from him," she said to Cole. Cole didn't move. He was looking at Hale, waiting for the signal. "You're outnumbered," Hale said calmly. "I have men on the ridge and one on the trail. You came down that east cut alone. Don't deny it. I had someone watching it." He took a step toward her. "Put the rifle down, and this can end without more bloodshed." "The way it ended for the 22 women in your ledger?" Clara said. Something crossed Hale's face, just a flicker. "You found the ledger," he said. "Copies are already on their way to Judge Aldridge in Denver," Clara said. It was a lie. The papers were inside her coat. But she said it the way Caleb said things, flat, factual, like she was stating the weather. And she watched it land. Hale's stillness changed quality, just slightly, the way a frozen river changed when the first crack ran through it. Still solid looking on the surface, but something had broken underneath. "That's not possible," he said. "Ruth Delaney's been in contact with Aldridge's clerk for 3 weeks, Clara said. Each word precise. She was making it up and building it solid at the same time, because the truth and the lie were so close together by now that the difference barely mattered. 22 names, Warren. 22 women. Dates, amounts, transaction records in your own hand." She paused. "How many people in Silver Creek do you think will stand by you when that goes public?" Cole was looking at Hale now with a different expression. Still calculating, but the calculation had changed. "Cole," Hale said. Cole didn't move toward Clara. That was the moment. She clocked it. The moment when a man who sold his loyalty for money started doing the math on whether the money still added up. "Cole," Hale said again, harder. "I ain't swinging for this," Cole said quietly. "You didn't tell me about any ledger." There are 22 names," Clara said, "and your signature next to every one." Hale looked at her, and then, for just a second, the sheriff fell away, and something older and uglier looked out from behind his eyes. The thing that had run a hidden camp for years, and slept fine afterward, and polished his badge every morning. "You were property," he said, low and savage and stripped of all the careful performance. "You were always property. Nothing you say in front of any judge changes what you are." Clara held the rifle steady, and Caleb, tied to the tree behind her with blood on his face and both hands bound, said clearly and without any particular heat, "She ain't property. She ain't yours. And you're done." Hale's hand moved toward his holster. Clara fired. Not at him, at the dirt between his feet. A shot that threw up dust and grit and stopped his hand cold. The echo of it rolled up the walls of the gulch and back. Hale went very still. On the south ridge, Thomas's voice rang out. "Both of you put them down, now!" And the sound of Margaret's shotgun being cocked followed it like punctuation. The two men on the south ridge looked at each other. They put their rifles down. Cole raised both hands without being asked. Hale stood in the dust, with the echo still rolling through the mountains, and looked at Clara across the 10 feet between them. And she looked back, and she did not flinch, and she did not look away, and she did not shake. "It's over," she said. He didn't reach for the gun again. He was smart enough, had always been smart enough, to know when a hand was finished. Ruth came down the trail with a length of rope she'd brought for exactly this purpose, and she tied Hale's hands behind his back, with the efficiency of a woman who had been planning this moment for 2 years. Clara went to Caleb. She cut the rope with the knife from his belt. His hands came free, and he tried to straighten, and nearly didn't make it, and she put her shoulder under his arm without asking, and held him up while the blood came back into his hands. "You lied about the copies," he said into her hair. "I did," she said. "Good lie. I learned from someone who doesn't waste words." He made a sound that might, under other circumstances, have been a laugh. His weight leaned into her, just for a moment, just the length of a breath, and she held it. "The ledgers are in my coat," she said quietly. "They're real. All of it is real." "I know," he said. She pulled back enough to look at his face. The cut above his eye was deep. There was bruising already darkening along his jaw. He looked like a man who'd been methodically beaten by someone who knew how to make it last. And he was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a word for yet. Something that was looking at her the way you looked at something you thought you'd lost and found again. "I told you not to come back until noon if something went wrong," she said. "Something went wrong," he said. "I noticed. You came anyway." "You said I wasn't running anymore," Clara said. "I wasn't running." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he straightened under his own weight. Not all the way. He'd need a few days before he was back to full. But enough. He reached up and touched the side of her face once, briefly, the back of 2 fingers against her cheek. It was there, and then it wasn't, like he'd checked to make sure she was real. She was. Behind them, Ruth had finished binding Hale's hands and was tying the rope to her saddle with a grim and satisfied efficiency. Cole had sat himself down in the dirt and was staring at his boots with the expression of a man reconsidering most of his recent decisions. Thomas had come down from the ridge, and Addie was standing at the edge of the clearing with both arms wrapped around herself, and tears running down her face that she didn't seem to notice. The older woman, Margaret, came down last. She walked straight to Hale, looked at him for a long time, and then said very quietly, "I watched you ride through this town for 6 years. I brought you pie at Christmas." She paused. "I owe 22 women an apology." Hale said nothing. Margaret turned away from him and went to stand beside Ruth. "We need to move fast," Ruth said, looking at Caleb. "His man on the trail got away when the shooting started. He'll be riding to get help." "How long?" Caleb said. 2 hours, maybe 3. Then we've got 2 hours to get him to the telegraph office and get a wire to Aldridge's circuit clerk before anyone tries to tell a different story. Ruth looked at Clara. "You need to come with me. Your testimony goes in the wire along with the ledger summary. Your voice, your words, starting now." Clara straightened. She pressed the oilskin packet of ledgers into Ruth's hands. She thought about 2 years of running, about a brand burned into her skin and a man who'd done it sleeping fine every night under a lawman's star. About 14 women she'd known, and 8 more she hadn't, and all of their names written in her memory like scripture, because she'd understood even then even in the worst of it, that remembering was an act of resistance. "Let's go," she said. And Warren Hale, the respected sheriff of Silver Creek, the protected and untouchable and 6-year nightmare of the Rocky Mountain Territory, was walked out of the forest at the end of Ruth Delaney's rope, in the full daylight, where anyone who looked could see exactly what he was. Clara walked behind him, upright, in the mountain summer light. Not running. Never again running. The telegraph office on Main Street had never seen 6 people walk in at the same time, and the man behind the counter, young, narrow-shouldered, with ink-stained fingers and the expression of someone who'd chosen this job specifically because it was quiet, looked up at the group and went immediately pale. Ruth walked to the counter first. "I need to send a wire to Judge Aldridge's circuit clerk in Denver," she said. "Right now. And I need you to write every word exactly as I say it." The young man's eyes moved to Warren Hale, hands bound behind him, standing between Thomas and Margaret, with the particular stillness of a man recalculating everything. Then to Caleb, bruised and blood-dried, hat back on his head like nothing fundamental had changed. Then to Clara, who was looking at the young man with the steady, direct gaze she'd been building for 3 weeks. "Mr. Hale," the young man started. "Is not the law any more," Ruth said. "Wire. Now. Every word." He picked up his pencil. Clara stepped forward and began to speak. She had been organizing it in her head for the entire ride into town. Not rehearsing exactly, but stacking the facts in order, the way you stacked kindling. What came first? What supported what? The names, the dates, the specific location of the camp, the road in, the building, the men she could identify by name or face or both. She spoke for 11 minutes without stopping, and the young man's pencil moved without stopping. And the only sound in the office besides Clara's voice and the scratch of the pencil was Hale's breathing, which had gotten tight and shallow in the way of a man watching a structure he built collapse from the foundation up. When she finished, Ruth laid the oilskin packet on the counter. "The ledgers go with the wire as evidence summary," she said. "Key pages. I've already marked them." She looked at the young man. "Send it." He sent it. The confirmation click of the machine was the most satisfying sound Clara had ever heard. She stepped back from the counter. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't let them shake until right then, and now that the wire was gone and the words were out in the world and couldn't be taken back, her body decided it could afford a reaction. Caleb was beside her before she'd registered he'd moved. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could feel the solid fact of him. "All right," he said quietly. "Fine," she said. The shaking slowed. "I'm fine." "You just dismantled 6 years of protected operation in 11 minutes. "I had the material," she said. "I've been carrying it long enough." Behind them, Hale said, "This won't hold." His voice had recovered some of its composure. The performance was back. Not as polished as usual, but back. One woman's testimony and a ledger that any competent lawyer will argue was forged. Aldridge will look at what you've sent him, and he'll see exactly what it is. A fugitive making accusations against the man authorized to bring her back. Clara turned around. She looked at him the way she'd been practicing looking at him, without letting the old fear find its footing. "There are 22 names in that ledger," she said. "Ruth has 3 witnesses in this town alone, and Judge Aldridge is going to want to talk to all of them." She paused. "You built your whole life on people being too afraid to speak. We're not afraid anymore." Hale looked at her. The performance slipped again, just slightly. "You think a judge in Denver cares about mountain women?" he said, low, aimed to wound. "You think any of this reaches past this territory? They'll close ranks, Clara. They always close ranks." "Maybe," she said. Or maybe 22 names is enough to make closing ranks too expensive. She turned back to Ruth. What next? What next was complicated, loud, and moved faster than Clara had expected. Word traveled the length of Main Street in under 20 minutes, the speed of a small town absorbing something too large for its usual rhythms. By the time Ruth and Thomas walked Hale to the deputy's office and sat him down under Margaret's watchful eye and loaded shotgun, there were people in the street outside the window. Not a crowd yet, but the beginning of one. Caleb came to stand beside Clara on the boardwalk. He'd cleaned the blood off his face in the trough outside the general store, and someone, Pruitt from the general store, had come out and pressed a clean cloth against the cut above his eye without a word, the way a person did when they wanted to acknowledge something, but didn't have the language for it. "How long before Hale's man gets back with reinforcements?" Clara asked. "Hour left, maybe less," Caleb said. "Depends who he finds and how fast they ride." "Will they try to take him back?" "They'll try something. Men who've been working for a protected operation for years don't just accept that the protection's gone." He was watching the street with that quiet, forward-scanning attention she'd learned was his version of worry. "It depends on how many of them are true believers versus hired hands. Hired hands tend to reassess when the math changes." "Like Cole." "Like Cole." He glanced at her. "You did well in there." "I fired a shot into the dirt." "Before that," he said, "when you called the lie about the copies going to Denver, that was the shot that mattered." Clara looked at the street, at the people gathering, talking, pointing. At a town that had lived comfortably with Warren Hale's secret for 6 years, beginning to feel the first uncomfortable tremors of what it had chosen not to see. "I'm angry at them," she said quietly. "All of them. Every person in this town who knew something was wrong and decided it wasn't their business." "That's fair," Caleb said. "Is it going to make any difference, being angry at them?" He thought about that seriously, the way he thought about things that deserved a serious answer. "Probably not," he said. "But the anger's honest, and honest is worth keeping." Clara exhaled. A woman emerged from the crowd and walked straight toward them. 40s, dark-haired, moving with a contained urgency of someone who'd been building toward a moment for a long time. She stopped in front of Clara and looked at her with an expression that was half relief and half something Clara couldn't immediately name. "My name is Frances Alcott," the woman said. "I run the schoolhouse on the East End, and I want you to know, I saw a woman in Hale's custody 2 years ago. A young woman. And I told myself it wasn't my place." Her voice was level, but it cost her. "I'm telling you now because I want it on record. I'll say it to any judge who asks." Clara looked at her. "What was she wearing?" Clara said. Frances blinked. Gray dress, dark hair, young, maybe 20. "Anna," Clara said. Her voice didn't change. "Her name was Anna Marsh. She was 19. She paused. "Her name is in the ledger." Frances closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were wet. "I'm sorry." "Tell it to Judge Aldridge," Clara said. "Not cruel, just direct. That's where it does some good." Frances nodded. She turned and walked back to the crowd with a particular posture of someone who'd just added something new to carry. Caleb watched her go. "That's going to keep happening," he said. "I know," Clara said. "Levitt." The trouble arrived at 4:15 in the form of 4 riders coming up Main Street at a pace that was not quite a gallop, but was not a casual afternoon ride either. Clara heard them before she saw them, and she was already moving back toward the deputy's office doorway before the first one cleared the far end of the street. Caleb was 2 steps ahead of her. He stopped in the middle of the boardwalk and let the riders come to him. The man in front was the one who'd been watching the trail south of town. He'd collected 3 friends on the way in. 2 of them Clara didn't recognize, and 1 she did. A broad man with a red beard who had worked the camp's outer perimeter for a year and a half. Her pulse jumped when she saw him, and she pressed it back down. The lead rider pulled up his horse 6 feet from Caleb. "We're here for the sheriff," he said. "Sheriff's in custody," Caleb said, "pending circuit court review." "On whose authority?" "Judge Aldridge's office."
Wire went out an hour ago. Caleb kept his hands loose at his sides.
"You're welcome to wait for the response. Should be here by morning." The lead rider looked past him to the deputy's office window, where Margaret's shotgun was visible and unmistakable in silhouette. The man with the red beard was looking at Clara. She looked back. She didn't move. She didn't reach for the rifle. She just looked at him, and she made herself hold it, and she watched him recognize her, and watched the recognition turn into something she hadn't expected. Uncertainty. He hadn't expected her to be standing there upright on a boardwalk in daylight, looking back at him. He'd been operating inside a system where she was property, and property didn't look at you. And now the system was gone, and she was still there, and it had broken something in his certainty. It was the uncertainty she'd been counting on. "Wire's not here yet," the lead rider said. "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not. But there are 14 people on this street who've watched you ride in, and at least 4 of them have already told me they're willing to testify to what they know about the sheriff's operation." He paused. "You want to add obstruction of federal process to whatever else you're already carrying? Ride on and see." The 4 riders looked at each other. The man with the red beard looked at Clara one more time. "I don't know her," he said to the lead rider, like a decision. The lead rider looked at him. "I said I don't know her," the red-bearded man said again, slower, louder. He turned his horse around. He rode back down Main Street the way he'd come. After a moment, 2 of the other 3 followed him. The lead rider sat alone for a long breath. Then he turned his horse and went too. Clara let the air out of her lungs. Caleb turned to look at her. "You all right?" "Ask me again in about 10 minutes, she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. The response wire from Denver came at 7:15 the next morning. Clara was in the back room of Ruth's laundry, where Ruth had insisted she sleep. Real bed, real roof, real walls. And she'd lain awake for most of the night, not from fear for once, but from the strange, enormous, slightly terrifying feeling of having done something that couldn't be undone. The wire had gone. The words were in Denver. Judge Aldridge's clerk had confirmed receipt and indicated Aldridge would ride within the week. Within the week? A week ago, she'd been in a mountain cabin learning to walk on healing feet. Ruth brought the confirmation wire in with 2 cups of coffee and set them both on the small table and sat down. "He's coming," Ruth said. "I know," Clara said. "Are you ready?" Clara turned the coffee cup in her hands. "I've been ready since the day I ran. I just didn't have anywhere to run to yet." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "What happens after?" "After Aldridge? I don't know," she paused. "That's the first time in 2 years I've been able to say that. I don't know what happens after, and that's not a bad thing." Ruth nodded slowly, then, "Caleb Walker's been sitting on my front step since 6 this morning." Clara looked up. "He didn't knock," Ruth said. "He's just been sitting there." Something moved through Clara's chest, warm and uncertain, and more frightening in a way than anything Hale had done to her, because this was a different kind of exposure entirely. "He's waiting to see if you're all right," Ruth said. She stood up and picked up her coffee. "In my experience, a man who waits on a step without knocking is saying something he hasn't figured out the words for yet." She headed for the door. "The coffee's better out front."
Caleb was on the step, exactly as described, hat on his knee, looking at the morning street with that forward-scanning quiet that Clara now understood was just the way he occupied space. Always aware, never alarmed, filing everything and releasing it. He looked up when the door opened. "You slept," he said. "Some," she said. She sat down beside him on the step, not at a distance, the kind of beside that was deliberate. "Wire came," he said. "I know. Ruth told me." She looked at the street. A few early risers, a dog, the smell of someone's wood stove breakfast, Silver Creek in the morning. A place that had hidden something ugly for 6 years and was only now beginning to feel the shape of what it had hidden. "Aldridge comes within the week." "Yes." "After that—" She stopped. "After that, you can go anywhere you want," Caleb said. "That's the point of all of it. That's what you fought for." "I know," she said. The street was quiet for a moment. "I don't know where I want to go yet," she said. She said it carefully, the way she said things she meant. 2 years of wanting nothing except to not be there. I don't have the habit of wanting something particular yet. Caleb turned the hat in his hands once. "That's fair," he said. "But I know—" She stopped again, pressed her lips together. The thing she was trying to say had been forming for a while, and she wanted to say it right. "I know that the cabin in the high timber is the first place I've been safe in 2 years. And I know that the man who keeps that cabin is the first person who looked at what was done to me and didn't ask me to explain it, and didn't make me carry his reaction to it on top of my own." She paused. "That matters more than I have words for." Caleb went very still. He looked at her. "Clara," he said. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I'm just saying what's true." "Because you taught me that saying what's true is worth doing even when it's hard." He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was coming up full now, and it caught the silver at his temples and the careful lines around his eyes that came from years of looking at hard country and staying steady inside it. "I'm going to say something," he said, "and I need you to know it's not because of what you just said. I've been trying to figure out how to say it for about a week." She waited. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because I'm responsible for you or because you need somewhere to go. Because the cabin has been quiet for 4 years, and I got used to that. And then you showed up and made it feel like something was supposed to be there." He paused. "I reckon that's not the most elegant way to say it." Clara looked at him. "It's honest," she said. "It is." She looked down at her hands, the coffee cup warm against her palms, the scar on her leg hidden by the skirt of the borrowed dress Ruth had given her. Still there, still permanent, still the mark of something terrible done by someone who'd believed he had the right. "You know it doesn't go away," she said quietly. "What was done to me. It doesn't disappear because Hale goes to trial." "I know," Caleb said. "Some days will be hard. Some days I'll flinch at nothing, or I won't be able to explain why I need to stand outside in the air for an hour, or I'll have nights where sleep doesn't come. I know all of that," he said. "I spent a year after the war not sleeping. I'm not asking for easy." Clara looked at him. "What are you asking for?" she said. Caleb met her eyes. "I'm asking if you'll let me be in the same place as whatever comes next," he said. "That's all." The morning street moved around them. Horses, voices, the ordinary business of a town that had a hard week behind it and more ahead of it, and would move forward anyway because that was what people did. Clara thought about a brand burned into her skin and a man who'd looked at it and wrapped his coat around her anyway. She thought about a door she hadn't barred. She thought about riding down a mountain with a rifle across her saddle
and her chin up toward the thing she'd been running from. And the thing that had made her able to do it wasn't anger. It was the knowledge that someone had stood still when she needed stillness. And that had changed the whole calculation. "Yes," she said. Not a performance. Not relief gratitude or rescue loyalty or any of the complicated conditional things that came from being saved. Something quieter and more durable than all of those. Caleb held her gaze for one long moment. Then he nodded. The way he nodded when something had been settled and didn't need more words. They sat together on Ruth Delaney's front step and watched Silver Creek come awake. And when Caleb reached over and laid his hand over hers on the coffee cup, just his hand over hers, nothing more than that, she let it stay. Down the street, the deputy's office held Warren Hale in a locked room, and somewhere in Denver, a judge was reading a wire and already reaching for his riding coat. And 22 names that had been written in the dark were about to be read aloud in the light. Clara could feel all of it, the whole enormous forward weight of what was coming. And for the first time in 2 years, she was not afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. Judge Aldridge arrived on a Thursday. Clara heard the horse before she saw the man, and she was already standing at the window of Ruth's front room when the circuit judge of the Denver district rode down Main Street with 2 clerks and a federal marshal at his side. He was older than she'd imagined, mid-60s, lean, with a white beard trimmed short, and eyes that moved across the street like a man reading a document he'd seen versions of before and was looking for the parts that differed. He didn't look like salvation. He looked like work. That was fine. Clara had stopped needing things to look like salvation a week ago. Caleb was beside her. He'd barely left Ruth Street since the morning on the step, sleeping in the stable out back because that was where he felt comfortable, and because Clara understood by now that Caleb Walker's way of showing care was proximity without pressure. He was always close enough to matter, and never so close that she felt crowded. She'd started to understand that as a language, his language specifically. "Ready?" he said. "I've been ready," she said. She turned from the window and went to meet the judge. Aldridge set up in the back room of the hotel, which was the largest private space in Silver Creek. And he worked with the methodical efficiency of a man who traveled a wide circuit and had learned to establish court wherever the territory put him. His senior clerk laid out paper and ink. The marshal stood at the door. The junior clerk brought in chairs. Clara was the first witness. She sat across from Aldridge, and she told him everything. Not the way she'd told it in the telegraph office, compressed and strategic, built for transmission. She told it the full way, beginning to end. 2 years from the first day to the morning she'd grabbed a stranger's shirt by Silver Creek and begged him to end it. Aldridge wrote and listened, and did not flinch, and did not interrupt. And when she finished, he looked up at her over the top of his reading spectacles and said, "You have an exceptional memory, Miss Bennett." "I kept it on purpose," she said. "I knew someday I'd need it." He studied her for a moment. Not the way men usually studied her. Not assessing, not calculating. The way you looked at evidence and recognized its quality. "The ledger corroborates everything you've told me," he said. "The dates align. The names align. The transaction records are consistent with an organized operation running for, at minimum, 4 years. He set his pen down. "I want you to understand what this means legally. Hale will argue coercion of the witness. He'll argue the ledger was tampered with. He'll put every resource he has into discrediting what you've built here." "I know," Clara said. "It will not be a quick process." "I know that too." Aldridge looked at her steadily. "Are you prepared for a long fight?" Clara thought about the brand on her leg. About 14 women she'd known, and 8 she hadn't. About Ruth Delaney riding 3 hours into the mountains with the weight of 2 years of guilt and a folded oilskin packet full of names. "Judge," she said, "I've been fighting for 2 years in the dark.
Fighting in the light is going to feel like a relief." He picked up his pen again. "Then let's continue," he said. The testimony took 3 days. Ruth went in after Clara. Then Margaret, the gray-haired woman who'd stood on the South Ridge with a shotgun and the long-accumulated fury of someone who'd watched and said nothing long enough. Then Frances Alcott from the schoolhouse, who sat across from Aldridge with her hands folded tight in her lap and described a young woman in a gray dress and gave the name Anna Marsh to the official record for the first time. Caleb testified on the second afternoon. Clara sat outside in the hall and listened to the sound of his voice through the wall. Steady, precise. The voice of a man who'd spent 4 years scouting and knew how to give a field report. He described finding her by the creek. He described the brand. He described what he'd seen in Warren Hale's face when their eyes had met across the street. The specific, deliberate quality of a man who recognized a threat to a system he'd built and was calculating how to neutralize it. When he came out, she looked at his face. "How'd it go?" she said. "He asks good questions," Caleb said. He sat down beside her in the hall. "He asked me how I knew the brand was deliberate and not accidental. I told him I'd seen it in the war. He asked me to describe the specific camp, and I described it." He paused. "He asked me why I didn't ride into town and report what I'd found." "What did you say?" "I said I knew who the law was in this territory, and I wasn't confident the law was going to help." Clara was quiet for a moment. "He asked me one more thing," Caleb said. "What?" "He asked if I had a personal interest in the outcome." A pause. "I said yes." Clara looked at him. "He didn't follow up on that?" she said. "He wrote it down and moved on," Caleb said, which I reckon is a judge's way of saying he noted it and found it credible. Clara looked down at her hands. "You put yourself in front of a federal judge and admitted a personal interest in a case involving a woman who was legally being called a criminal fugitive," she said. "Yes. That could complicate things for you." "Probably," he said. "I did it anyway." She looked at him. He was looking forward at the wall across the hall, with that still, settled expression that she'd come to understand meant he had made a decision, worked through its costs, and was at peace with what he'd paid. She reached over and put her hand over his. He turned his palm up and held it. Neither of them said anything more about it. The third day ended with Aldridge calling Clara back in. She sat down across from him and waited. His expression had changed. Not warmer exactly, but differently weighted. The expression of a man who had received more than he'd expected. "I received a response this morning from my counterpart in the Southern District," he said. "The county court that issued Hale's writ for your return." He folded his hands on the table. "That judge has been removed from the bench, pending investigation. It appears the writ was not the only irregular document to pass through his office." Clara's breath stopped for exactly 1 second. "How many?" she said. "We don't have a full count yet, but the correspondent suggests Hale's operation extended into at least 2 other territories, with judicial protection in both." Aldridge looked at her steadily. "You were not the only person who ran, Miss Bennett. You were simply the one who ran to the right place." She sat with that for a moment. The right place. A dry creek bed in the Colorado high country, where a roan horse had stopped and a quiet man had knelt in the dirt and wrapped his coat around her and said, "Not today." "The other women," she said. "The ones in the ledger. Can you find them?" "We are already in the process of locating every name in that document," Aldridge said. "Some will be found, some may not be, but every name will be entered into the federal record, and every man identified in those pages
will be pursued." He paused. "That is my word, and I do not give it casually." Clara pressed her lips together. "Anna Marsh," she said. "She was 19. Dark hair. The woman Frances Alcott saw." "We'll look for her specifically," Aldred said. Clara nodded once. It was not enough. Nothing was going to be fully enough. But it was real. And real was what she had to work with. "One more thing," Aldred said. He reached into the papers before him and extracted a folded document. "The writ naming you a criminal fugitive. I'm voiding it, effective this morning." He slid it across the table. "You are not a fugitive, Miss Bennet. You are a free woman. Legally. Formally. On record." Clara looked at the document. She picked it up. The paper was crisp and official, and covered in the language of law that she didn't fully understand. But the word void was stamped across it in red ink that was still slightly damp, and she understood that perfectly. She folded it, put it inside her coat, against the ledger pages that had started all of this. "Thank you," she said. Aldridge picked up his pen. "Thank yourself, Miss Bennet. You built this case. I'm simply the instrument it required." She found Caleb outside. He was at the rail with Dusty, running a hand along the horse's neck the way he did when he was thinking something through. He looked up when she came out and read her face in one quick look. "Good news," he said. It wasn't a question. "The writ is voided," she said. "I'm not a fugitive." "You were never a fugitive." "I know, but now the law knows it too." She stopped in front of him. "There's more. Hale's operation was bigger than we knew. 2 other territories, judicial protection in both." She paused. "Aldridge is going to look for all 22. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You did that," he said. "We did that," she said. He shook his head slightly. "I found you by a creek and didn't ask questions. You built the rest." She looked at him for a long moment. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah?" "I want to go back to the cabin." He looked at her. "Now?" "Not this minute, but I want to go back." She said it carefully, meaning all of it. "I want to go back to the high timber, and the meadow, and the quiet. I want to wake up in the morning and hear the horses, and not be afraid of what the day is going to bring." She paused. "I want to learn how to want things again. Small things first. I think that's where you start." Caleb watched her face. "Small things," he said. "Coffee in the morning, walking in the meadow, learning whatever it is you do in the winter up there." She paused. "Figuring out what I'm good at besides surviving." "You're good at more than surviving," he said. "You already know that." "I know it up here," she touched her temple. "I'm still working on knowing it in the rest of me." He nodded. "That takes time." "I know." She looked at him directly. "Will you give me time?" "Clara," he said, "I've been giving you time since the first morning. That part comes natural." Something opened up in her chest. Not dramatic, not the relief of crisis passing, but something gentler and more durable. The particular feeling of a door that had been held shut from the inside finally being opened from the inside too, on purpose, in daylight, by choice. She stepped forward and put her arms around him, not falling into him, not clinging. A deliberate, clear-eyed embrace from a person who knew what she was doing and had decided to do it. Caleb's arms came around her, and he held her the way he did everything. Steady, without drama, with his full attention. They stood on the boardwalk of Main Street in Silver Creek, and the town moved around them, and neither of them cared. The twist came at sundown. Clara was helping Ruth pack up the laundry room. Ruth had insisted on feeding everyone involved in the trial proceedings, which had turned into 3 days of cooking
that functioned mostly as Ruth's way of processing something large through her hands. When Thomas burst in through the back door with his hat in his fist and the expression of someone who'd been running. "There's a woman at the hotel," he said, breathing hard. "She came in on the afternoon stage. She's asking for you." Clara set down the cloth she was folding. "Who is she?" "She says her name is Anna Marsh." The room went absolutely still. Ruth's hand stopped moving. Clara stared at Thomas. "She saw the telegraph traffic," Thomas said. "She's been in Pueblo for 6 months, working in a boarding house. The telegraph clerk there is friends with Aldridge's clerk, and word traveled." He stopped because words weren't moving fast enough. "She's here, Miss Clara." She came because of the names in the ledger, because someone finally said her name out loud in an official document. Clara didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then she walked out of the laundry room and down the street to the hotel, and she went inside, and there, in the front sitting room, was a young woman with dark hair and the particular stillness of someone who had learned to make themselves small in a room and hadn't quite unlearned it yet. She looked up when Clara came in. She was 21 now, maybe 22. She had the same eyes that Clara remembered, watchful, careful, already calculating, and a gray dress that was not the same one Francis Alcott had seen, but close enough that it hit Clara in the sternum like a physical thing. "Anna," Clara said. The young woman stood up. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she pressed them flat against her sides, the way you did when you needed them to stop. "They said your name on the wire," Anna said. Her voice was steadier than her hands. "They said Clara Bennett testified. They said the ledger was verified. They said—" She stopped. "I've been in Pueblo for 6 months telling myself I was too far gone and too alone, and there was no point." She pressed her lips together hard. "And then I saw your name." Clara crossed the room and took both of Anna's shaking hands in hers. "You're not too far gone," she said, "and you're not alone." Anna's composure held for exactly 3 more seconds. Then it broke, the way composure broke in people who'd been holding it up through sheer force of will for months. Completely, all at once, like a river going through a dam. Clara held on. She thought about a dry creek bed and a man who'd wrapped his coat around her and waited. She thought about the particular power of being held by someone who didn't need you to explain yourself, or recover quickly, or be anything other than exactly what you were in that moment. She held Anna Marsh and let her cry, and she did not rush her, and she did not say, "It's all right," because it wasn't all right yet. But it was going to be, which was different and more true. Caleb found her an hour later, sitting on the hotel step with a cup of tea Ruth had materialized from somewhere. He sat down beside her and looked at her face. "Ruth told me," he said. "She's going to testify," Clara said. "She'll be the 23rd name. A living one." She looked at the cup in her hands. "Aldridge is going to want her testimony tomorrow before he rides." "That's good," Caleb said. "It is." She paused. "There'll be more. If Anna found me because of a telegraph wire, there are others out there who'll hear and come forward. This doesn't end with the trial." She looked at him. "I want to be reachable. When they come forward, I want them to be able to find someone who knows what it was like." Caleb studied her face. "That's a big thing to take on," he said. "I know." "You sure you're ready for it?" Clara thought about that honestly, the way she'd learned to think about hard questions, without performance, without the answers she was supposed to give. "No," she said, "I'm not sure, but I'm going to do it anyway, and the not being sure is just part of it." She looked at him. "That's something I learned from you, actually." "What's that?" "Doing the right thing, without waiting until you're sure." She paused. "You found me by a creek, and you didn't wait until you were sure I was worth the trouble.
You just acted. Caleb turned his hat once in his hands. You were always worth the trouble, he said. Clara looked at him. She had spent 2 years being told, implicitly, explicitly, systematically, that she was worth exactly what someone else decided to assign her. Worth keeping, worth selling, worth the effort of the brand that was supposed to make the assignment permanent. She had spent the last 3 weeks learning a different arithmetic, the kind where a person's worth was not assigned from the outside, where it was not conditional on behavior or usefulness or whether you made things convenient for the people around you.
The kind of worth that was simply present, inherent, requiring nothing to justify it. She hadn't fully learned it yet. She was going to be learning it for years, but she was learning. I know, she said quietly, and she meant it in both directions. She knew it about herself, and she knew he'd always seen it. Caleb put his hat back on. I was thinking, he said, that before we ride back up, I'd like to take you somewhere. She looked at him. Where? There's a small forge behind the cabin. I've been meaning to do something with it. He said it carefully, like the words mattered. But I wanted to ask first. Clara watched his face. Ask, she said. He was quiet for a moment. The evening was coming down full now, and down the street the hotel windows were lit, and somewhere Ruth was still cooking, probably, because Ruth processed everything through her hands. And Silver Creek was settling into the ordinary rhythms of a town that had a hard thing behind it, and more work ahead. I've got an old bullet casing from the war, he said. Been carrying it a long time. The way soldiers carry things, not for the memory, but because putting it down never seemed like the right moment. He paused. I think the right moment might be coming up. Clara looked at him. What would you do with it? She said. Melt it down, he said. Hammer it into something that's got a different use. He looked at her steadily. If you'd let me. She understood him. She sat with it for a long moment, not hesitation, just the right and honest time it took to receive something real. You said you wanted to learn what you're good at besides surviving, Caleb said. I figure we've got a whole winter up there to start finding out. He paused. I'd like to be there while you do. You'd like a lot of things, Clara said. I generally know what I want, he said. That's true. She looked at her hands, at the healed rope burns on her wrist, faded now to thin, pale lines, at the coffee cup, at the street before her, at the whole wide-open fact of a future that belonged to her. Yes, she said, for the second time, and it felt exactly the same as the first time. Not like relief, not like rescue, like something chosen, clearly, with full knowledge of what it cost and what it was worth. Caleb held very still for a moment. Then he nodded once, that settled, final nod, and stood up and offered her his hand. She took it. They rode back to the cabin the following morning. Anna Marsh stayed with Ruth, who had already decided she was keeping her for as long as it took, with the absolute authority of a woman who had made a decision and was not revisiting it. Aldridge took Anna's testimony and packed his clerks and his marshal, and left for Denver with a case that 3 people in the territory were going to spend the next 2 years trying to fully unravel. The high timber was cool and still when they came through the cutback path into the meadow. Caleb unsaddled the horses. Clara walked through the meadow in the morning air and turned her face up and breathed. The scar was still there. It would always be there. Some marks were permanent, and pretending otherwise was a lie she'd never been willing to tell herself. But a mark was not a definition. It was a record. It said, here is what was done, and here is the person it was done to, and that person is still standing. She heard the sound of the forge behind the cabin beginning to work. Caleb, starting the fire the way he started everything, quietly
and without announcement. She turned and walked toward it. Later that afternoon, he came to where she was sitting in the meadow grass, and he knelt down and held out his open hand. On his palm was a ring, small and imperfect, and made from a thing that had once been meant for killing, and had been hammered into a different shape by a man who had decided the original shape was no longer acceptable. "This used to be a weapon," he said. She looked at it. "I know what it was," she said. "Now it's something else." He held it steady. "It's a question, and you can answer it however you need to, and I'll accept the answer either way." Clara looked at Caleb Walker, the quiet mountain cowboy who had knelt in the dirt beside a dying woman and said, "Not today," and meant it with every settled, unshakable part of himself. She looked at the ring. She thought about the first morning and the barred door and the long, slow work of learning to trust something you'd been taught was always a trap. About small gestures and steady presence, and a man who kept his promises because he simply didn't make ones he couldn't keep. She reached out. She took the ring from his palm. She put it on herself, a deliberate act, her own hands, her own choice, and held it there for a moment, feeling the weight of it. "It fits," she said. Caleb's expression did something rare then. The steadiness was still there. It was always there. It was who he was. But underneath it, something came through that she'd only glimpsed before. Something that had been waiting a long time for somewhere safe to land. "Yeah," he said. "It does." The summer wildflowers moved in the mountain wind around them. Above the tree line, the afternoon sky was the hard, clean blue of high altitude in late July. Somewhere down in Silver Creek, a judge was riding toward Denver with 23 names and a case that was going to outlast everyone involved in it. And in a high meadow in the Rocky Mountains, a woman who had been told for 2 years exactly what she was worth sat in the grass with a ring on her finger that had been made from something broken and had come out the other side as a promise. Some marks were meant to end a person, but some people were built to take what had been done to them and carry it forward into the light. Not as a wound, but as proof. Proof that they had been there. Proof that they had held on. Proof that surviving, in the end, was not just the bravest thing a human heart could do. It was the beginning of everything else.